David, I'll begin with you. Your thoughts on this phone conversation between Xi and President Biden. The fact that mom and dad are talking, is it a good thing?
I think it's a good thing. I think it's very interesting they had such a long conversation, an hour and 45 minutes. President Biden apparently raised a number of different issues where China and the U.S. disagree. And what I find interesting about that is it's clear what President Biden's position is on many of these issues. For instance, on Ukraine, President Biden wants China to stay out of the Ukraine war. President Biden is supporting Ukraine, providing weapons to Ukraine. But China says they're neutral. But more and more, we're finding component parts that are coming from China, helping the Russian military. We're finding vehicles that are made in China, supporting the military. And notably, the ministers of defense of China and Russia met recently, and they expressed support for each other. Take another issue, Taiwan. It's very clear. The U.S. and President Biden have made clear that China should stop interfering with Taiwan, should stop taking provocative measures against Taiwan and in the South China Sea. And President Biden's even said that the U.S. military will defend Taiwan. It's not clear if China intends to invade Taiwan. Certainly the provocative measures suggest that it might be preparing for that sometime in the next few years. Also on fentanyl, President Biden asked China to stop, to halt the supply of chemicals that are precursors to making of fentanyl and other illegal drugs. China says it will help, but has it helped? Is it really intending to stop that? On climate change also, President Biden apparently raised that. It's an important policy for the Biden administration, but it's not clear if China really is all in on supporting us and supporting the international community on climate change.
Nii-Quartalai Corte, to you now. Mom and dad are talking. I won't assign the sex to either party, just that they are talking. Your thoughts on the fact that there was this phone conversation that followed really what was a chill, a concerning chill, not only from the White House, but also from the Pentagon?
I would imagine that this is a point of pride for President Biden and the administration. They have really been pressing for a sustained interaction with China at all levels of government. As was mentioned by the reporter in the field, we know that Secretary Yellen is headed to China later this week. Secretary Blinken will be headed to China shortly after that, in addition to the call that was had today. And so we're seeing evidence of that sustained engagement with China. It's also important to point out the material difference this sustained relationship can make for everyday Americans. China is a dominant player in batteries, making batteries for electric vehicles, and this poses a significant risk to our car makers, our U.S. car makers. They are rapidly getting in the business of making and exporting cars around the world. And by the way, their influence is not shrinking; it's growing. We know that the United States is one of the biggest markets for China, but so is Africa. A year ago today, I was just coming back from having covered Vice President Harris's historic trip to Africa. We were in Ghana and Tanzania and Zambia, and it was very clear in all parts of that continent the influence, the growing influence of China. And so this is an important player that we can't ignore.
David, COVID taught us why we can't always all get along, which is that we found out that our supply chain was severely impaired by China. We couldn't get masks. We couldn't get parts for ventilators. We couldn't get even some of the things that we needed with regards to vaccines. So there has been this decoupling from China because our two economies were so intertwined. How do you decouple two economies that size without appearing hostile one way or the other? As Nii just pointed out, there is the issue of electric cars. China now entering the market of the electric vehicle market, and they're saying they want to be a world player.
Well, it's very difficult, right? It starts with us. We have to develop industries where China is more dominant than us. That includes rare earth minerals that are so important to electric vehicles. That includes semiconductors and other key areas where we depend upon China. We have to develop that, and we have to develop it among our Western allies so we have a more secure supply chain. We also have to protect the American worker, and President Biden Biden is exploring different tariffs on China where China isn't competing fairly with the United States. But at the same time, we do want to continue trade with China. It's such a large trading partner. And Europe and our European allies, the same, have a strong relationship with China. And we also want to maintain influence with China, especially because China has influence with some of our adversaries like Russia, like North Korea, and like Iran.